All right. Finally, we have our technical difficulties all figured out. So that's great. So yeah, we just wanted to start the day by asking how the reading went and how you all felt about annotating the Texas article.
It was pretty cool.
Annotating was definitely better after I'd read it like the second time.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel more comfortable like taking down notes and kind of doing it the way that we articulated in the article resource?
Can you repeat that question again?
Oh yeah, I was just asking like their comfort levels using the annotation resource and doing it that way.
I was fairly comfortable with it. It was better than just like somebody handing me a paper and saying, "Here, annotate it." Like at least I knew kind of what I was for with the guide.
I could agree with that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad that it was a good resource for you all. So now we're going to get into the discussion of the day. So how we're going to kind of begin it is that with college discussions and mostly like upper undergraduate discussions and discussions for graduate school, the way it works is that a lot of times professors will kind of assign a weekly article. So it'll be either some kind of scientific paper or journal article like the one that we had you read for today. And so what happens with that is that there is an assigned facilitator or two for that specific article. So the whole class they have to, be semi-experts over the paper and understand it like you all did with this paper and come with questions and other discussion points. But what happens with the facilitators is that they kind of have to be the quote unquote experts of that paper and be able to kind of facilitate the discussion and allow it to go in like a good direction. So that's how Jamie and that's the role that we will be playing today. So as you all discuss, you'll be able to kind of lead the discussion where you want to go, but you can always turn towards us for help or extra like information.
So for that, what that means is often the facilitator first just gives a brief overview of the articles just to make sure everyone's on the same page. And also it can be nice to have a little bit of a refresher. Mm-hmm. So starting with the energy policy case study, the Texas wind markets and grid modernization. The article basically is talking about how Texas exists in its own isolated electric grid, unlike the rest of the United States, where there's like the Western connection, the Eastern interconnection, et cetera. So in Texas, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, also called ERCOT, which is separate from the rest of the grid, is a deregulated competitive market that has multiple utility companies and in different areas. And it is the Public Utility Commission of Texas, also PUCT or PUCT for short. Unless they decide there's not enough competition in the wholesale market to support a retail market, then there's often only one company providing people with electricity, which is typically run by ERCOT. So that means ERCOT provides around 90% of all of Texans' electricity, and the corporation is also in charge of maintaining the reliability of state's electrical power grid. So this whole system is based around having large traditional fossil fuel power plants on a large grid, which this can make it difficult for distributed energy resources, which just means things like renewable energy such as wind, solar, and biomass to participate in a competitive market. So this ERCOT market is for energy only, meaning they don't have payments to cover things like generators, which often makes generators unavailable to people, which, as we know, generators are often important for storing renewable energies. So this further limits the integration of DERs, DERs, so the renewable energies. Now, ERCOT is not opposed to including these DERs more into its markets. In 2015, renewable energy made up only 1% of ERCOT electricity, and it was generated with natural gas being the main resource for ERCOT, around 53% of Texans' electricity. And in a poll by the company, the majority of Texas customers actually said that they wanted more of these renewable energies in Texas because they were concerned about the environment and they were willing to pay more to have these energies.
Mhm. So now transitioning into kind of the articles talking about the science behind the polar vortex. So the article polar vortex, the polar vortex is a strong band of winds in the stratosphere, and this is between 10 and 30 miles above the North Pole. And this congregates every winter. So what happens is the winds enclose a large pool of extremely cold air. In about every other year, the vortex dramatically weakens and it can be pushed off the pole and splits into two. So at the surface, cold air is pushed southward and the mid-latitudes, towards the mid-latitudes, and warm air is drawn up into the Arctic. So this is why it creates like kind of like a wave, and that's why it went down into Texas and created kind of that little like longitudinal pole of cold weather. So it's reasonable to suppose that the polar vortex played a significant role in this extreme winter weather outbreak in the southern plains, which includes Texas, back in February of this year. And this context, I bring it up because it's important due to the polar vortex affecting natural gas production in Texas during the blackouts that happened in February. So on February 17th in 2021, natural gas production in the US fell to about 21% below average, and natural gas production in Texas fell to almost 45% during the week of February 13th. The decline was mostly a result in freeze-off, which occur when water and other liquids in the raw natural gas stream freeze at the wellhead or in natural gas gathering lines near production activities. And this happened because in Texas, they don't have freeze protection on their pipes.
Does anyone have any questions about anything that we talked about before we start the discussion?
No, ma'am.
Okay then.
All right, so now we're going to transition into the discussion portion of today. And so we kind of want to set like some ground rules for the discussion just so that it goes more smoothly. So kind of things like, letting each other talk and not speaking over each other. And I know you had a couple rules as well, Jamie.
Yeah. So another one is we want to, since this is supposed to be a more professional, formal discussion, so you want to really say what you actually mean. So like, for example, you often don't want to say words like stupid, things like those that are technically ableist insults, but you want to say more like, oh, the system is flawed or they didn't plan properly. So actually say what you're getting at versus the like first level kind of brain thinking where maybe you're reading the article and you're like, this doesn't make sense, this is awful. But so you're really getting to the meat of it, like why is it awful, and explain it to other people so you can discuss it. And those are just our couple of rules that we think are important for today. But we wanted to give you all the opportunity to say any sort of discussion rules you think might be really important for today.
No, you can't throw anything. Okay?
Yes.
No throwing of items. That means you, Emily.
I might rage.
No raging, Emma.
I might rage.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'm really thinking about the army.
Let's talk about your army plans later. Yeah. Okay, I think we're ready. I think that other than the non-throwing, and now we know.
Okay. Okay. And Jabin, if any like students from the back maybe have like some talking points, if you could like repeat them, because sometimes it's hard for us to hear.
Sure.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the way this starts out is first we just open up the floor for anyone. If you have any questions or thoughts you want to discuss, then you can open it up.
I think interesting that not only did Texas like separate themselves from the rest of the grids, but they also kind of put all their eggs in one basket with the ERCOT. And I don't know, it seems like it would be a better idea to, balance where you're getting your energy from instead of just throwing all your eggs in one basket.
Mm-hmm.
What do other people think about that?
I agree.
So what kind of baskets could they put their eggs in?
I like that.
A metal one.
Metal one.
I mean, just using different energy sources. Like, Texas is, they're closer to the equator than the rest of the U.S. They'd get more benefit from like solar power and I'm sure there's enough grassland and that type of thing that would benefit from wind. So I feel like there are definitely some renewable energy sources that could have been used, at least as a backup, if nothing else.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if that stuff is so like widely available, then why isn't Texas using it?
We got something that works until it freezes.
Wait, I didn't quite get, because it works something.
Because if they've got something that works, and that's fine, and then I guess they just worry about it when it freezes.
But it is obviously growing. It went from that in 2015, 18% of it was like renewable or like from wind energy.
Mm-hmm.
It was.
There's almost none of it that's from solar, and I feel like they benefit a lot more from solar.
Mm-hmm. So if you look at that graph, it's in the Texas grid paper. I think it's about 1% that's in renewables other than wind.
Yeah, and that's hydro, biomass, and solar. So solar is like 0.33% currently. Nuclear 6%. Wind is, yeah, like you said, 18%. But the main eggs are the natural gas.
Mm-hmm.
It's huge.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, so Justice has said, if you've got it, why not use it?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what do you think are some reasons why they shouldn't be using so many fossil fuel resources, even though they have it and they have all of the pipelines and the power stations? But why do you think they should change their eggs?
Because their water will catch on fire.
Mm-hmm.
That's a reference to Gasland, because the natural gas fracking process has caused some of those chemicals to leach into the watersheds, and so people can actually light their tap water on fire.
Wow.
Yeah. You want to describe how it went, Emma? Okay, good job. It was.
I also have another, since Texas is on part of the Gulf of Mexico on the coast side, why haven't they tried to use hydroelectricity from the waves?
Mm-hmm. So actually, that's a good point. I guess we didn't technically go over wave energy. We went through like hydro energy and like dams and things like that. But wave energy is actually an alternative energy that's still kind of far behind things like wind and solar, just because it's hard to put like things to trap the energy out into the ocean, because the ocean is such, a big force, and it erodes a lot of stuff, can easily just ruin a lot of technical advances. So that's one of the reasons why it's not as advanced.
So what do you think happens to like metals when they're in a huge salt body?
The salinity of it would rust it, wouldn't it? Eat it away.
Eats that stuff.
Yeah, so wave energy doesn't have right now as much incentive as other alternative energy. So that's one of the reasons that it hasn't been developed a whole lot right now.
But who knows, maybe like the Dyson spheres, someday it might be more applicable.
There you go.
But
Nice.
clearly plastic isn't as affected by like the ocean salinity. So why haven't we like tried to use some of the recycled plastic, especially that's like what's already been sitting in the ocean, to make like the turbines and that sort of thing?
Yeah, well, turbines are made more, I believe, out of like metals and things, so you couldn't use plastics. But you're right, we could do more with reusing them instead of using more fossil fuels to make plastics, since plastics are like fossil fuels in a different form. But that's why all these things are really integrated. So thank you for bringing up using wave energy. So next we want to, I have a question that I think would be good for us to discuss as we're starting this Texas case study. So the electrical grid is deregulated. So we're curious what you think the benefits versus drawbacks of the Texas grid are.
I guess I'm still not entirely sure like what they mean by deregulated. So does that mean that like there's nobody that controls like who can sell what at what price, or like that part just confuses me a little bit, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the best of my ability of understanding is you're right. It's more about the market and like the pricings. So that's the part that's deregulated. So obviously they still have to like coal plants still have to obey like the Clean Water Act by Congress, the laws about like how much carbon and whether or not you can like pour things into rivers. They still have to follow the regulations for that. But it's like the market and the pricings. And when they decide like, oh, two companies can compete in this area, or there's not enough competition, so we're only going to let like one company have a monopoly over that area.
Mm-hmm.
What are the benefits and drawbacks of having that?
Well, I think that like the big thing is that the like renewable industry just isn't profitable. So have a deregulated market in energy, all the different companies are going to focus on the products that are more profitable. And when renewables haven't been subsidized or incentivized, nobody's going to bother investing.
Jabin, could you help us out? Like I
Yes.
got some of the words, but not the whole picture.
Yeah, so he was talking about the fact that fossil fuels are more profitable, and so since it's deregulated, you're going to make more money off of the fossil fuels than you would off of trying to invest in renewables at this point.
Mm-hmm, exactly, and it's
Right.
because of the fact that if it's a deregulated market, but subsidies for fossil fuels still exist, so they're like helping prop them up in this deregulated market, so the renewables are unable to compete without having subsidies of their own.
I do think that like if it is Texas that can say like, you know, this group has a monopoly in this area, it could be either more or less efficient because of distance, and as far as, you know, losing, I don't necessarily know if you lose a lot of energy moving the natural gas from one place to another, but if it's closer to the plant, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, and so like what kinds of energy solutions would help with like, if you don't want to move energy around a lot of areas, do you think would work in Texas?
Like personal, so like having solar panels on your house, or that it's quite literally in your backyard.
Yeah, so focusing on individuals having access to energy is definitely a part of like making more renewable energy more accessible to people. But as well, a lot of like some portions of Texas are very rural. And so that's why they believe putting windmills in, like, you know, wind turbines could help provide electricity to more rural areas, as well as some of that could go to cities as well.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that alternative energies benefit from deregulated markets in any kind of way? Or is it mostly geared towards fossil fuel?
Fossil fuels.
Also. So are you saying like there's no benefits to alternative energy and only to fossil fuels?
No. I think that. I feel like there's been a trend.
Well,
I didn't know that you
just
guys
quit
didn't
throwing stuff.
No,
Emma.
there's pros and cons to every energy source. So I think that some pros to one energy source is better than the pros to another one, but maybe that they have cons that are greater than the other energy source. Right?
Could you repeat that, David?
She's talking about trying to weigh the pros and cons. So
Mhm.
there's pros and cons for everything. So do the pros outweigh the cons for
How big
one?
are the pros?
How big are the pros versus how big are the cons? Is that what you're saying, Emma?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a good way to look at it.
Mhm.
I'm blushing at you. I'll throw mine at you. If it's like deregulated and the prices get pushed really high, it might encourage some people to go like to their own renewable energies, because even though there's an upfront cost, they wouldn't have to, continue to pay for the high cost of like the
Mhm.
natural gas they're caught.
And actually, that's why, like, for example, coal has gone down because natural gas prices have gone cheaper. So people have moved to that. And then if renewables, you're right, if they become cheaper, people will move to that. Although, like you said, there's a lot of upfront costs, which would probably be a barrier to a lot of people.
Mhm. So it's like, is that even fair? So like that kind of integrates like environmental justice to that question.
Hey, can you talk a little bit about that for a quick second? Because I think that was one of the issues that came up with a few students as we were discussing it. Racism, of course, is a big thing right now, but when you hear
Mhm.
environmental racism, there might be some misconceptions of what that exactly means.
So environmental justice is the big broad term for basically any form of social justice that's also tied like to the environment. Like for example, if a water supply gets poisoned, that's a social justice issue. And for environmental racism, it's when, because the system is racist, that means often the systems in place will end up harming people because of racism through the environment. So for example, like we talked about with coal plants, a lot of coal plants are placed in low income, especially people of color communities, because they're not able to lobby the coal companies and be like, no, you can't build in our neighborhood. So coal companies will go to the path of least resistance. So they're going to build their power plants where it's the cheapest and easiest place to build.
Mhm.
And then, so all of that pollution is now put on people who probably don't have good health care because they're low income, who experience racism in healthcare as well. So that's why like having renewable energies is an environmental justice issue, because those communities are bearing the true costs of the fossil fuels. So like, for example, white communities are getting all of this energy, to turn on the light switches, but they're not bearing the cost of breathing in carbon and their children having asthma and having to go to the hospital. That's being borne by other communities. So.
Mhm. At least
Can you
the
explain what you
brunt.
mean? Yeah, great. Can you explain what you meant by true cost?
Yeah. So like a lot of people look at fossil fuels and they look at the cost of like, okay, how much does it cost to put in a well pump, collect the oil, build the pipeline, ship it, to the gas station, and you put it in your car. But no one's calculating the costs of like, for example, if the oil spills, like the water, and so now you have to pay to clean the water.
Mhm.
Or like, so the exhaust that comes out of a car, that's why a lot of cities have smog and poor like air pollution,
Mhm.
high air pollution, so poor air quality.
Mhm.
So those people are having to have higher healthcare bills because now they're having to have inhalers, or they can get lung cancer, things like that. So like all of those health costs to human life or the
Mhm.
environment aren't calculated when it's, oh, gas is $2 like a gallon. That's just the like commercial costs, but not all of the hidden healthcare costs or environmental costs.
Yeah, it's a lot of the impacts that up front you don't normally think about.
Kind of like with our food stuff we talked about, right?
Mhm.
Thank you.
Mhm. So now that we've elaborated a little bit more on that, did you guys recognize any kind of like social justice or environmental racism within the articles that we read for today?
I didn't notice any, I guess.
What about the bills? Like, did you guys see anything about the cost of electricity on any of those things? Talk a little bit about that too. They're frantically flipping through their papers, but no one's talking. So
It doesn't have to be like super specifics. Just like, do you remember that like some people's energy bills jump to thousands of dollars? So how do you think that would impact like environmental racism, for example? If your electricity bill goes from $100 to like 3,000.
Well, you might not be able to pay for it, and then you're not gonna have electricity.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
So then you're just,
You're an SOL.
So did you hear that? They said that if you can't afford the bill, then you're not going to be able to pay, or then you're not going to have electricity.
Mhm. Which happened to a lot of people.
Yeah. And what's coming up soon in Texas, folks?
Cinco de Mayo.
What?
True.
It's true, but I was thinking more about like, why would people want electricity?
It's gonna get hot.
It's
really.
gonna get hot.
Mhm.
Sorry, I took.
well, I even noticed, so I noticed last night, I was out by one of those big power line, like overhead.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You can, like, at night, you can hear those things.
Mhm.
Yeah, with
Yeah,
rain.
yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't even raining last night, you just hear it.
Touch one and see what happens.
We don't advise that.
Yeah, that's on Javen.
That does not represent the views of Mary Lee Environmental.
Why did this get silent all of a sudden? You guys like stop laughing all
It's all right.
Okay. So going back to some of the questions, we were curious, since we're talking about like kind of like social justice and the electrical grid, what political motives, if any, do you think affected the prevention and the reaction to the events in Texas in February?
Well, political, I guess, like, why it happened is obviously, whoever came up with this grid was all about making money and not really worried about anything. Essentially, they were like kind of, I don't know, in a way like tragedy of the commons. They just cared about themselves and making the money, and then bam, you have all this. Everybody's out of power.
Mhm.
Because if you remember, one of the articles said that there have been some less severe, but still that kind of like polar vortex, extreme cold that has caused some of these problems to happen before, but they never did anything like adding insulation to natural gas pipes or double checking that the windmills are resilient against cold, things like that.
Mhm.
Because that kind of updating the infrastructure would cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
So it was an economic motive.
Well, and it even says, like, they even said that they recognize that it needs upgrades and auxiliary services to maintain and improve system stability. Like, they
Mhm.
it obviously would not hold up the major event.
Yeah, that's a good point because I believe this article came out in about like 2016, 2017. So like if they recognized that back then why haven't those updates like been done?
Mhm.
Jake said everything's bigger in Texas.
Yeah. So how do you think like the solution is to get them to update this infrastructure?
Well, probably events like this. I mean, I would think they might have an incentive to do something now.
Think so? You think they care?
Do you think they need any like support, or like do there need to be more policies, or what sorts of like solutions?
I think if you're regulated, you know, as far as like lobbyists and that type of thing, because I'm sure that, like the politicians have, some type of equity in like the natural gas companies and that type of thing. So if, I don't know, if we can somehow find a way to separate politics and the big businessmen, like you'll have a much better chance of things getting done.
Yeah, those natural gas companies control what they want to control.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to point out, because even in like presidential candidates, we've seen that they have had, you know, these really intricate ties to fossil fuels, and, you know, those kind of corporations. There's a lot of politicians that are also backed by a lot of these companies that are, you know, related to or produce fossil fuels. So I think that, yeah, like you pointed out, is a big factor in, you know, why we're still kind of in this like position that causes, you know, blackouts like in February.
And we've been talking a lot about how like renewable energies and like the grid and whether it should be deregulated market or regulated. But how do you think climate change plays into all of this? Some of the articles kind of talked about those connections, as well as just what you're thinking about as you read these articles.
I mean, as our weather gets more severe because of climate change, if the infrastructure is still unstable, you're gonna have events like this, like what happened in February, a lot more often, and you're gonna have a lot of people that are upset and a lot of people who don't make it through those events.
Mm-hmm.
More extreme weather events. Did you hear that? That's, yeah.
Yep.
Well, then what happens if it gets, if things do, of course, we're gonna have cold weather, but some areas are gonna have more hot weather, right? So what do we want when there's more hot weather? Cold air. We need the cold air, right?
Mm-hmm. That's an important health issue, especially for like the elderly or disabled people. It's especially important to have like cooler conditions.
Did you guys get that? Like, that's huge. And I'm so glad that you brought that up, because when you hear about this stuff, when there's extreme heat, you hear about deaths. And it's like some old lady in an apartment that doesn't have air conditioning. I mean, it sounds like I'm targeting that person, but that's the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
So again, that's kind of ties back to the environmental justice issue, because there's a lot of poverty with older people as well. So they might not be able to like afford renewable energy if we don't have, like one of you mentioned, an equitable way to make sure that everyone has access to the renewable energy. So that's another good point.
Are you all kind of seeing the cycle that's happening? Like, as climate change becomes more intense, then we have to use more things like AC, but obviously we're using non-renewable energy. So that's, you know, increasing the impacts on climate change, increasing climate change, and it just goes on and on and on. You know, so I think that's really important to kind of point out.
The more we compensate, the more problems we make.
Say that again.
The more we compensate, the more problems we make.
The more we compensate, the more problems we make.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
great way to put it.
Because it's kind of like putting a Band-Aid on the issue instead of actually fixing the issue. So speaking of like how to fix the issues, are there on, I don't know what the page number is, but on table 2, the policy checklist for Texas, are there any policies you all think would be part of this solution?
Here's the check. I've got it up on the screen too.
Oh,
Okay,
awesome.
thank you.
Yep. Can you repeat the question again?
Yeah, so this nice list says whether or not Texas has these policies or not. So are there any policies you all think that moving forward would maybe help Texas fix this issue of like the energy during extreme weather events or helping with climate change?
The energy storage mandates.
Yeah, more incentive,
Okay, more incentives for that. Yep.
But why is that important?
because in the event of you have a power outage or something, you have at least a backup for at least a period of time to pull from.
Mhm. Yeah, and are there renewable energies that depend on being able to store them as well?
Yes.
Mhm.
Solar is definitely that way.
Mhm.
Yep, exactly. Things like solar and wind. Yep. What other policies?
The requirement for filing smart grid plans.
Which one?
Requirements for filing smart grid plans.
Requirements for filing smart grid plans.
Mhm.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 down.
Like if you would have, made sure that your grid was, nice and smart. You put it in.
To do community solar programs.
Oh no. Okay, hey, let's give it up, everybody, for Jamie and Kayla. This was so much fun. Thank you. Hey, remind me, I want to do, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I just want to say thank you for the great discussion and for just having great insight for the rest of the week.
And thank you for working with us this whole week.
You guys are awesome. Hey, remind me tomorrow. So my friend Chad Beck, who I named Ira Beck after, lives in Texas, and he's got some stuff he wants to tell you about with this and his bill. He says he knows more about local beer than he does about energy, but he'll tell you what he knows. We'll talk. Text who?
David.
Oh, yeah. Send me an email right now. I haven't forgotten, but I've been consumed with this. I do. I want to talk to him too. Okay, bye. Hey, can you both stay on for a second and then let me spray these desks and then we can talk.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Ooh.
Okay. So you're going in the army, huh, there, am I?
Yeah, I'm going into the army, y'all.
That's cute.
Pray for my college.
Yeah, and it will. That's true. Hey, thanks for helping out with
I gave them, not gonna lie, I didn't read those.
Oh, yeah, okay. All right, so hi. Hey, so a couple quick things. I loved the fact that even though you're not here, I felt like at least we had like a little bit of a connection and you remembered things like the Dyson sphere. And I, of course, totally wish that you would be here because I think it's always fun when people can connect with people from the outside world. But one of the things that I loved is just that idea of backing up some of the stuff that I'm saying in class and knowing that it's not just something that you're, like it's Jabin's world, like telling you all the stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's always good for me to see that, or for students to also hear that, like, oh, here's two wonderful people who are getting their masters and they're talking about these things too. And I honestly don't know how many schools in Indiana are talking about what happened in Texas, but like it's a big deal and I think it's good. And these kids they need to also kind of understand that like this is how this can go at the college or grad school. And so I love this. You are both like up there with one of my favorite Mary Lee groups that have connected. So thank you. Like I'm not, that's no lies. I'm not trying to inflate your ego here. You all prepared really well. Sorry about the technical difficulties. But I've made myself some notes. In the future, this is how to hook everything together. So, there we go. But I really appreciate your thoughtfulness and your ability to patiently wait for students to talk. And then you did a great job of taking what they said and asking further questions, but then also you had a great ability to lead that discussion without being in control. You know, I think that's a rare trait, and I struggle with that too, because like there were a couple times I was like, David, don't talk. Jamie and Kayla have this. You know what I mean? But I think it's just that teacher me. I get excited. I'm like, oh, Carl, go right. Let the kid talk. And I think
He's
you
just
all,
crazy, guys. He's just crazy.
That's my principal, by the way. He's awesome. So I think these are Mary Lee grad students. So they were virtual, and they're Professor Marcos.
I'll
So
give you my phone number. We can talk afterwards, but I wouldn't listen to a thing he says.
whoa, you get the true story there. But no, I think that's a rare trait, and I think that was great. And I know that you've been working with a variety of ages and maybe not had a lot of experience with high school kids, but I thought that's as good as you can get for 3 days and virtually overcoming a lot of those things. And so Marcos, you and I could talk later about this stuff if you want, but like really seriously, I feel like I got the lottery with you two doing this class. So I appreciate that, and I know there's things that we could do different. You know, if you were with me for a semester, we'd have a talk afterwards and say like, okay, let's try these things with this group. And I think that's the part that I always struggle with this is that, you know, you're jumping into a class that you don't know, that you can't really see their faces. And even if you were here personally, you know, we work on respect and trying to be respectful, but also you got to earn some of that cred too. And I think you both did a good job with that. So kudos, great. Do you have any questions for me?
How did you feel about the reading, especially the Texas grid reading?
Yeah.
After the annotation, did you feel like the students really used that resource?
Yeah, it's something I will definitely use in the future. And that's what I told him yesterday when we started. I said, look, this is not busy work. This is not something that like I'm just throwing at you because I owe Marcus a favor, you know, that sort of thing. So I literally said, this is something that we're going to use. And so I will definitely use that in the future. One thing that I would have maybe, if we had time talked a little bit about the differences between some of those articles. I love that first question. Like, you know, is this, you know, what kind of article are we talking about? Are we talking about a scientific paper? Are we talking about, you know, just some sort of, like the first article that you sent about the polar vortex, I think there's some contradictory information in that compared with one of the government websites about that. So I like to talk about looking at those sources. And I think if we would have had another day, we could have spent like, okay, evaluating those sources and determining, is this something that I should really look at deeply, or should I question this?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you were leading them there. We just didn't have time to talk about that.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna definitely spend a little bit more time on that, and I will use this in the future. So thank you for that. Any other last questions before I get to anatomy? They're just biting at the, you know, chomping at the bit. They just want to soak up all the learning right now.
Jabin, just real quick on a scale of like totally missed it to nailed it, how do you think that they judged the level of depth and detail of the conversations, the content, et cetera, to what you were looking for with this particular class of students?
I would say if it, on a scale of 1 to 100, according to what I wanted for this, I would go with 98, and I just don't like to give hundreds. So
So it was well judged in terms of like not being too complicated over their heads, but not too simple.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Great.
Like I wanted them to, there was some moaning. There was some kids that didn't read it all the way through. But which is, you're going to get that. And that's why I gave this students time to do this in class. But I think that they were able to, they see the purpose of it. They got to look at different articles. I think they're still in this mode of like, the first thing they look at when they receive an article is like, oh God, it's 32 pages, and like, I'm like, but look at this. This is a table on one entire page. There's 4 blank pages. There's 6, pages of links, so, but I get it. I understand. I mean, I do that too. If I get homework from my boss, my principal gone, right? I scrolled down at the bottom, like, oh, we had to do a training recently and it was like 2 hours long. And we had to watch a 2-hour-long YouTube video. So I ended up downloading a YouTube extension that sped it up, like, so I could watch YouTube videos at like twice. It didn't sound great, but I got the information. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's that natural like thing in us. We're like, oh man, I don't know. So I like knowing that they could get something big and realize like, okay, I can do this. Okay. But also then there's all these supplementary articles too. I feel like the scope and sequence of our days together was really good. I felt like you listened to what I asked or my needs. And I appreciated that, like there's been groups in the past where I'm like, oh man, I don't think they're understanding what I'm getting. Like, not to rip on any of them. Everybody's done a great job. There's never been a group from Mary Lee that I'm like, oh, I'm never having these kids back, that sort of thing. Kids, sorry. But no, I felt like you listened, you gave challenging articles, and you also, you made it interesting. So great job.
Thanks for that feedback, Jabin. And you're like in class right now, right?
Yeah, everybody's listening to me.
Well, why don't we wrap up, and then Kayla and Jamie, I'll send you a separate Zoom so that we can do a little bit more debriefing.
Yeah, and email me if you have any questions. And just because you're done with me at like this 3 weeks, 3 days, or I guess 3 weeks, let's stay connected. Like, it's fun. Like, guys, if you want to follow me on Twitter or on Instagram, it's FireHouseJB. That's because I can put this in here. That's my my Instagram. I used to run this all ages music venue in North Manchester. We had indie rock bands come in and play, and it was super fun. And some of them are famous now. I could talk hours and hours about that. So that's where my name comes from. But yeah, it's fun to connect with like Allie, who's at Little River, and Shay, who's out west, and all these former people that have joined. It's nice to stay connected. No requirement, but if you want to connect, I would love to see where you end up after you graduate. And also, if there's ever anything that I could do for you from my perspective, job hints or teaching hints, like, I'm not washing my hands of you. Feel free to connect in the future.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
Yeah,
Hey,
sure.
Thank you so much again, Jabin. We really appreciate it. And I'll